Okay, so Christine and I are back and to chat today about a question that we got in our group from a mom in our group here. And so she had asked a couple different questions, but sort of all packaged into one. And we're gonna try and unpack it today for everyone. So she asks, I'd love to hear about your experiences with husbands that work their tails off for their family, how you were able to help them find balance, how you dealt with taking on the entire load of kids and home, and finding time for your relationship as well. So, for Christine and I, we both totally understand this and in our own way, obviously not exactly the same, but we do understand it each on our own. Both of our husbands are engineers and they work a lot of hours. They love their work, they love what they do. It definitely is a passion for them. And it definitely can be a lot of time in it and doing it. So what we're going to do is through the specifically the emotion and intelligence work that we've been working on is one of the things that we've worked through is the story that's told. What is the story that's told? And so there's 4 different questions that we ask to try and figure out the story, because we could go through and just say, how we help them find balance, how we dealt with it, what, this is the solution, which would be very diagnostic and it probably wouldn't work. And actually, in fact, it hasn't worked for us when we've, for example, tried to help them find balance. So I know you have a great story about this. Not necessarily about balance, but like just about that if we're trying to help them. So I know you can definitely speak to, I know we both have like probably a million stories we could actually tell, but you have one that is like fantastic. I love this story. So
Oh, yes. My story is classic. So it was shortly after the pandemic happened. And so my husband was working from home, and our daughter has the office for school. And so he was working at the kitchen table. And our grocery delivery had come and there's different things going on. And, I'm just going about our day and I noticed that, he's getting a bit upset. And so he mentions to me that, someone on the call had said how it was too loud, and I don't remember the exact wording, but something to the effect of, he needed to have it more quiet. And so right away, I just went into, okay, I've got an answer and I will, fix this for him. So I went out to the garage and I got a card table, and our oldest daughter had just moved into the basement suite. And so I just set it up in her room, and I told the girls, like, okay, like when daddy's at work, you can't interrupt him, and, he's busy doing these things. And I had set up all of these, rules, sort of speak, so that he would be able to be uninterrupted for his work and his calls. And how great of an idea was this? And he was not appreciative of this, of all the hard work that I did for him. And I thought, are you kidding me? I went out into this spider infested garage. I wiped down this card table. I got you a chair. I even have water up there for you. I let the girls know I did all of these things. And he was not happy about it. And so instead of, me asking him why he wasn't, I right away went into how, he was being ungrateful and I was doing all these things for him. And we literally fought about it for 2 days. And I was not backing down, and neither was he. And he's working all these hours. And I thought, how can you not be grateful for the fact that I set you up this makeshift office? And eventually he just said, I already am away from my family so much, and it's like you are punishing me by having me up in that room with the door closed. I'm like,
wow.
okay, uh, wait, what? Like,
Yeah.
that was not my intention here. I was
Right.
trying to help you. And then when I started working in UEQ and all this intelligent work, and I learned about corrective complex, which is the knee jerk reaction to fix, heal, teach, direct, or convert with unsolicited, um,
Advice. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
unsolicited confirmation of wanting that,
Yeah.
that it actually causes more damage. And really, what I needed to do is say, that sounds really frustrating. And what are some things that we could do about this? And what would you like to have happen? And how can we make this better for you? And so uh, that was a total eye opener of how not to do things, even though everything inside of me was 100%
Yeah.
trying to support him and to make it a better experience for him to work at home during the pandemic.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue into like how we want to just have this conversation right now, is because we want to take it into like four different questions. And so the thing is that we can't do anything for anyone else.
Mm.
It doesn't matter, like, so the question of like, how do you deal with taking on the entire load of kids and home and find time for your relationship, like, those are great questions because especially taking on the entire load, that is what I can control. And so that's something for me that I've had to learn, even with my kids and stuff too, because of that corrective complex. Like, I have to focus on what I can control. So I can't control anything to do with anyone else. Well, actually, when our kids are little, we actually can sort of control that. But it will get to a point at some point, guaranteed, even if you have a very compliant child, at some point there will be a fight response. That can be for another topic. But so we're going to go through the four questions that we're going to ask, and it's what, when, how, who. And we're going to do that for us. And so hopefully anyone that's watching this, that you can ask these questions of yourself, because honestly, it will be different. It'll be different for even us too going through it. And it'll be different for every other person listening to this. But we've found going through these questions so helpful in that moment. And so I think the first thing is that the first question that I try and ask myself, I don't always, of course we're not perfect. I don't always get there. I get to the frustration and then I'm like, oh, okay, just stop a minute. And so the first question that I try and ask myself is, what am I feeling and what am I thinking right now? And there's a really specific reason why we ask like and be able to say I feel and I think. And the reason for that is because the feeling is all in like the back part of our brain. It's all in the amygdala, and it's the fight, freeze, flight, fight, or conform is what happens there. And so by saying, what am I feeling? That's the first part. But then we need to take it to the I think, because that brings it to our forefront in the prefrontal cortex, where that's where like regulation happens. So if we sit in that I feel, that's where, like, kids temper tantrums. Adults can have temper tantrums too, just they look a little different maybe. But if we stay there, but saying like I feel and I think. And so what am I feeling and what am I thinking? So for you, Christine, so when you think about um this example of like your husband that's working like hours and hours, I don't even know how a 40-hour work week actually ever even is a thing. Like, honestly,
No.
I never known one myself. My husband doesn't know one. I don't even know if I know anyone that works 40 hours, like, honestly. And I'm not saying that as a anything, but just is.
Yeah.
And it's not out of like, they love it too. So it's but for you, when you think about like what she's asking about, working a lot, dealing with taking on the load of the kids in the home and finding time, like for you, what is the what are you feeling? What are you thinking?
Well, it kind of depends on the situation, but definitely when I ask myself, what am I feeling? Often words like overwhelmed, uh, disappointed, uh, frustrated, um, ignored, uh, um, maybe underappreciated. There's probably a lot of those feelings that can go into it. Sometimes even desperate. Like sometimes I'm feeling really desperate, or I'm really trapped with. Is there really a way out of this way of him working all these hours um, and being able to see past that or not without. I mean, I'd rather him working all these hours than not working at all. So, how do you find that? How do you find that medium in there? And so those are a lot of the feelings that come up. And then what am I thinking? Um, Often I realize that I'm thinking about myself. I'm thinking about the kids. I'm thinking about him. I'm thinking about our health. I'm thinking about well being. I'm thinking about family time. I'm thinking about um, if there's any other options or what options would even look like. So to me, when I go from what am I feeling to what am I thinking, I then start to get some different ideas of how I can proceed.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Definitely.
takes the raw emotion out of it.
Exactly. Exactly. We can actually, I don't know, like you can say, like, think straight,
Yeah.
actually get ideas, instead of when we stay in that feeling. If we stay in those feelings, like we can really spiral. It can really spiral out of, I mean, you can get to a point where, I mean, you could get to a point where, like, oh my goodness, I don't even think like he even loves me anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I think I don't think he wants to be with me. I don't think,
Right.
I mean, you could definitely get there by staying in those feelings, but by going to the, I think, so, like, I definitely, like, I feel we have 5 kids. When our twins were born, they just celebrated their 12th birthday, but 12 years ago, like, they came early. So we went from a family of 5 to a family of 7 overnight, with where they were in hospital um, for 2 weeks. And Jillian was 2, Kaylee was 5, and Erica was 8. And so, like, that was a really overwhelming time. At the
Yeah.
same time, Kaylee had been diagnosed with scoliosis. Erica was diagnosed with uveitis. We were doing appointments, especially for Erica, literally, like, goodness, almost every other day. And she had drops that we were doing like every hour on the hour. I had, I don't even know if people even have them anymore. Like, this was before like all these phone stopwatch thing, but like I had a stopwatch, like would go off every single hour, and we'd have to stop everything, and didn't matter where we were. And so, like, I get that, like, taking on the entire load was a lot. And so, like, overwhelm definitely comes to mind. And in those times, like, there were times where I could get so overwhelmed that I just wanted to sit and then just shut down and cry.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
but at the time, it's like I couldn't do that. So it's like, okay, well, I just got to keep going, and I got to keep going, and I got to keep going. Well, at some point that will catch up. So if I, now I have these skills with the emotional intelligence work, and being able to say, like, I feel overwhelmed when I think about my watch going off every single hour and having to stop everything, no matter what we're doing, no matter if I'm feeding babies, no matter if I'm, like, changing a diaper, like, okay, finish up, and trying to remember that. And and it goes on through, like, I feel overwhelmed when he has to go out of town on a work trip and the kids are sick for
Yeah,
example. I mean, now we're in a very different position. Like Erica's 20 and, like the twins just turned 12, like very different position. But there's different overwhelm as well.
totally.
You know, I feel sad that at times where when he is working late, and has so much pressure on him, and we're watching a movie as a family, you
Yeah.
know, or wanting to like, so what that does is it helps us to regulate and really bring it down to what is actually going on. What am I actually feeling? What am I actually thinking in that? So then it takes us to the next question, which is, when does this happen? So when has this happened before? Because, and this is an interesting one, and we've talked about this before, because it can take us into places that maybe aren't like, it's not necessarily like, when has this happened before? Oh, well, like, 2 years ago, he was working on this project and it ended up being like, really overwhelming in our house because I had so much other stuff going on. Sometimes it can take us into other parts of our life, actually, of
Yeah.
the when does this happen before. So for you, I asked, like, when does this happen for you before?
Yeah, and again, that one was, it can sometimes even take you all the way back into your childhood, that
Mhm.
it can be a trigger, it can be an emotional response to a time when you were a child, um, a time when you were a young adult. It might not even have anything to do with your marriage. It might be something that you witnessed even.
Mhm.
And and for me, there is a lot of unpacking of guilt, of shame, of judgment, of um, being really self-critical on myself and on other people, and realizing that there's many different reasons and causes for people having to work all the time,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
um, not having the same priorities as you, or um, viewing things differently than you. And so when I started to ask myself, when has this happened to me before? Or when have I experienced this? I really started to see different patterns.
Mm.
And I started to see different reactions to things and different responses to things. And so then that actually started to help me be able to track things better, so that I felt like I had things that I could control. I felt things that I could work on. And so that it wasn't out of my control, but that it was something that I could do and I could change. Because maybe I can't change how much my husband is working, but I could change how I view it. I could change how I understand it. I could change how I respond to it. And let's be honest, when especially when our kids are younger, or like, when our kids have, in our case, having a child with special needs, it takes a lot out of you. And there are times that you would love nothing more than for him not to have to work, so that you know he could take over. And one of the things for me is that he often does, even though he's been working all those hours. And what I had to learn to let go of was the guilt of that. And I had to let go of the story that I was telling myself, in which he deserves to have the time off. I'll just do that. And and so that started to happen when I started asking myself, when has this happened before? And um, when have I seen this happening?
Totally. And that, I think for me too, like that even just when you were talking there, brought up too, that for me it became a thing of, that I was taking on stuff that, like, um just that I didn't even necessarily need, didn't even have
Yeah,
to. Like, it
straight up.
I didn't, I've realized in the last while, I did not learn how to self-advocate. Well, I did self-advocate, but it got shut down.
Yeah.
So my own health, for since I was a child, literally, and especially when I got into the teen years and stuff, it it was really bad. And I would self-advocate, yet I was always told that I was fine and there's nothing wrong. And honestly, like, I've lived this with my kids and I have fought for that. And again, I mean, we can, that's another whole story. But what I've realized is that, like, when does this happen is some of this has to do with me, because
Mhm.
like, I know, like Brian will ask me, like, what can I do to help? My first response is always like, no, I'm good. I'm good.
Yep.
Yet I'll go sit down and be like, oh my goodness, I have so many things. I don't even know how I'm going to get them all done. So for me, like, the when does this happen? It actually took me into myself of, like, it had nothing to do with like him working. So it has to do with me not self-advocating,
Yeah.
not just asking for what I needed in that.
Yeah.
The other part that I've realized too, is the trust part. And this, so we've done this assessment called the 3XQ, and very interesting. And actually, we could even do another thing on
Oh my
our
gosh, that would be so
assessments.
much fun. Yes.
So that'd be cool.
Yes.
Anyways, okay. So out of that, and then like all these questions, and it's really cool because the whole thing, just really quickly, is based on your intrinsic needs. And so one of the things that I realized in going through then the social emotional part of the assessment was, I realized that, like, I only trust myself. And
Mm.
of course there's a story there, and I'm not going to get into that now, but that's the other piece for me that's really hit about, like, when does this happen? It's because I really only trust myself, because of past things. Again, like you said, things can go back into childhood, can go, like, these are like sort of patterns that happen, and it's just asking those questions of, like, when. So now let's take it into the next question, which is, how do you think it got to this point? How did we get here now in this moment of this, like, oh my goodness, we don't have balance, we're overwhelmed, we're taking on the entire load, we don't have time with our for our relationship. How did we get here?
Truthfully, when I really started to look at that question, how did we get here? I found myself feeling defensive, actually, because what I wanted to say was, well, it wasn't for lack of trying. Like, I did everything that I
Right.
could do.
Yeah.
Did I, though? Is a whole different story.
Right.
For me, how did I get here? A lot of it had to do with I do not have I do not have effective boundaries or healthy boundaries or any boundaries for that matter. I didn't grow up with them. I didn't understand how to communicate boundaries, asking for what I needed. Uh, I sort of grew up with, whatever I could do to keep myself out of trouble or to make myself useful or to add value. And so I did that by doing for other people. And as long as I was doing this or doing that, then I had value. So how did we get here? Well, I think it was on both sides. There wasn't enough effective communication. There wasn't enough allowing the other person to be. There wasn't enough questions being asked. And so you just get busy in the surviving, that all of a sudden you realize I am barely surviving here. And it takes a lot of courage to actually answer, how did we get here? And um, how did this happen? Because it can actually, again, it can go way back, and it can go, even you bring stuff into your marriage. And so um, that self-awareness piece, that allowing the other person to be themselves, that decision to grow and to change and to develop. And when you don't have those tools, doesn't take much for that erosion to happen. And
Right.
the good news that I have found is in being able to really answer that question honestly, without judgment, without condemnation, without self-deprecation, just saying, okay, this is where I am and this is how I got here. Now what? And that for
Yeah.
me, it was a pivotal moment
Yeah. Yeah.
um, in answering that question honestly, instead
Yeah.
of being defensive, which was my first go-to feeling.
Honestly, that's often my go-to as well. Probably most people, I don't know. I mean, it's mine anyways. Yeah, like I want to be defensive and like I don't want to take responsibility
Who wants to
for
take responsibility, right?
me. I'm not the one that's like, but and that's where I found like asking these questions are so powerful because it's
Yeah,
focused on me. It's focused on like what I can do. It's not like what am I feeling? It's not like, well, what's going on with him? Like when did this happen? Well, when did he do this? Like when, like, how did I get to this point? Well, how did he get us here? Like those are those aren't helpful questions. The like, what am I feeling and thinking? When does this happen for me? How did I get to this point? It has a focus on me and me trying to figure out my stuff. Because like you said, like, I mean, none of us were, we don't live in a perfect world. We weren't born to perfect parents. We didn't have a perfect childhood. We're not perfect. We're not, like there's nothing perfect in this world. And so how did it get to this point? I think for me, it's exactly like what you said. It's like all these little pieces. It's like this huge puzzle, really. And that's where I find like these questions help me to narrow it down and help me to kind of go, like, if we look at it as a puzzle, it's like we have this massive puzzle in front of us, but these questions kind of go, okay, so here's all the blue pieces, here's all the white pieces, here's all the red pieces, and you can kind of put them together and then end up with this whole piece
that's right.
together.
Yeah.
And so that's where I find it so powerful. Also, by asking these questions, we are keeping ourselves in our prefrontal cortex in the front part of our brain so that we're actually asking questions that can actually help us,
Yeah.
and then if we have this, then we can actually go to our spouse and we could actually ask the same questions. What are you feeling and thinking? Like, I mean, first we'd want to ask, like, hey, can we have a conversation? When would be a good time to have a conversation? Not just starting to talk, especially in that heated moment of, like when, for example, he comes and he's like, yeah, so I just got another project dropped. I'm working all weekend and plans are getting canceled. So instead of in that moment of like, what is going on here and trying to ask the questions, it's taking that step back first of all and going, okay, when can we have this conversation? And not when people are heated, but then just asking like, hey, what are you feeling and thinking right now? When has this happened for you? How did we get here? And asking those questions. But for now, I mean, we're just focused on us and doing that. So then the last questions, and it's a group question of the who, and it's, who are you? So like, who are you right now? Who am I right now? Who do you want to be? And who do you want to be you with? So in this context, again, because we're in this like work context, the load of the home and the kids, like all that relationship. So how would you answer those questions?
Oh, and again, the right along with the how, the who questions, um, I found probably the most vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
because I really had to look myself. I had to look myself in the mirror. So, in this case, with in regards to, him working all the time. Who am I in this moment? Um, I am a lonely wife wanting my husband's time and attention. And allowing myself to be honest about that. Um, and that's hard because you want to be understanding, you want to be supportive, you want to be loving, you want to, you know, be helpful, you want to be all of those things. And I am also, this lonely, um, desperate wife wanting, her husband's time and attention. So that's who I am in that moment. Um, who do I want to be? I want to be, um, the wife who, on top of being, um, honest about being lonely and desperate, that I am, um, a woman who, through her vulnerability, can approach her husband in a loving way and saying, "How can we make this better? And how can we find a way together to have both of our needs met?" In terms of that 3XQ, I'm on one side where I'm all about the relationship and I'm all about the connection, and my husband is not. And
Right.
and I think that because of that, if we cannot have that conversation about how we can both have our needs met, um, then those questions of who am I and who do I want to be can be skewed a little bit. So I
Yeah.
want to be the wife who can be both, understanding and vulnerable, that I can be, independent and dependent, that I can be, um, helpful and also advocate for the things that I need myself, that I can have my needs met for connecting in relationship, as well as being confident enough to allow him and give him what he needs as well. So that's who I want to be. And who do I want to be me with? Well, I want to be, me with him.
Right.
And I want to be that example to my girls. And I want to be, um, that encouragement and that lighthouse to the people around me, so that they can find their inner strength. They can find their inner light. They can, um, advocate for what they need in their relationship, and to give them hope for themselves. And
Yeah.
it all comes back um, to me being willing to be vulnerable and to step out of my comfort zone in a way that is going to not only get me what I need, but, invite my husband to do the same. And
Right.
it sounds really nice. It is a very hard task to do,
It is. Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so for me, like when I first asked that question, like, who am I? Um, I really struggled with that in the so this goes into even like into the social emotional learning part of, so for me there are well, in the emotional intelligence there's contracting emotions and expanding emotions. For me, i always I always believed and knew, and all I knew was there was negative emotions and there's positive emotions. So any negative emotion was like anything to do with sad, overwhelmed, upset, angry, disappointed, shame, like anything like that. Those were negative, meaning in my world, they were bad emotions. You don't want those. And the other end was positive, so they were good emotions. Those were good things to deal with. And so for me, that first question of who am I, when I would ask myself that, if it wasn't like, well, who am I? Well, I'm supportive and I'm encouraging, and that. And it was hard. I remember the first time that I ever went, well, actually, in this moment right now, when I'm thinking about this scenario, I am angry, or you know, like you said, I am lonely. I'm hurting right now. Like,
Yeah.
and that was so hard for me to say that, because to me it was always negative. But
Totally.
in that moment I was. And so I always as well, and I mean, there's so many other topics we could get into, but like, oh goodness. But like for me, like my words have always been so important, like what I speak and such. And so I think I just took it way too far. But speaking that, I was like, oh my goodness, if I speak that, then I'm going to get more of that.
Mm.
And I really learned that I needed to speak that to be able to work myself through it.
Yeah.
It loses the power when it's like spoken. So for
Yeah.
me to be able to say, like, who am I in that moment? Well, I'm hurting. I'm
Yeah.
sad in this moment.
Exactly.
But then but we don't stop there. And
No.
that's the thing that I guess I was able to kind of hold on to. And I was like, okay, so who do I want to be? Well, I want to be someone who I can speak my truth, who will advocate for myself, who can speak up when I have a need, and do it out of love,
Yeah.
and do it, you know, in a way that hopefully, in this case, my husband will hear me.
Yeah.
And instead of like throwing a temper tantrum or whatever other things we've tried, and it doesn't work so well. And
No.
but who do I want to be, and then who do I want to be me with? Well, in this case obviously it's with our husbands, but the same thing too, like with our kids. Like I want our kids to see how we can work through these things.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So the questions again that we were asking, just for a quick recap, was like, what am I feeling and what am I thinking? When does this happen? How do you think it got to this point? And then who do you want to be? Who do you want to be you with?
Who are you
Or
first?
who are you
Who are
first?
you?
Yes. I was like, yes, there's one missing.
Who are
Who
you
are
in this
you
moment?
in this moment?
Yeah.
Who do you want to be? And who do you want to be you with? So those are hopefully that will help, and just kind of walk through those questions for anyone that's watching. And honestly, you can do this with like, you and I have talked about this so many times and done this with so many different topics and stuff.
Yeah.
So hopefully this will help someone in walking through something, but specifically, being able to help within our families and be able to do that and taking on the entire load. And, I mean, I guess what would be, kind of going out of that, but for you, were there some sort of practical things that we could like, these questions are great and they're big questions, but I know, so for me, like one of the things with dealing with the entire load, sometimes I just needed to ask for help.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it is overwhelming sometimes. And
Yeah.
sometimes I just needed to ask for help. One of like, honestly, one of my favorite or most impactful memories was after the twins came home, and someone came over and they were just like, I mean, obviously I was feeding it. I had to have full responsibility, but they came over and they just sat and they're like, I'm just going to sit here and you can go shower. And honestly, I still remember that, like 12 years ago. And that was like one of the best times for me, was just someone just coming and sitting and doing absolutely nothing. Like really, they didn't do, but in my mind, I just knew that like, okay, if someone was going to cry or something was like, that it was going to be handled, I could just go shower. So sometimes
Yeah.
like, and I look for ways now to even try and I mean, obviously with COVID, it's not quite that simple. And I know for us, like, especially in Alberta, we have like new restrictions to not even, and all that. But maybe there's like a text or something that I could send to someone, and that just, would just hold space for them. Just
Yeah.
like I mean, you've done that for me even the last couple of days when I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm like freaking out right now. I'm so stressed. I'm like, whatever. And you're like, okay, tell me about it. What's going on for you? Like,
Yeah.
and just that space to be, which has been
Yeah.
amazing. So for you, like maybe one thing or two things that would be.
I think for one thing for me in terms of how do we find time for each other. One of the things that I had to learn for me is that there wasn't going to be uh, a big amounts of time anywhere. We have a special needs daughter who needs someone around all the time. Um, Respite work is hard to come by. My husband's working long hours. I've now am doing UEQ and tutoring and stuff myself, and so um, time is rare. And so I really started to shift my perspective. And that came from acknowledging the sadness of not being able to have date nights or a lot of time. And we would get 10 minutes sitting on the porch, or 5 minutes sitting in between meetings, or half an hour here, or 2 minutes there. Um, Stolen kisses in the kitchen, different things like that. That it wasn't a lot of time, but I allowed myself to be present in that moment instead of wishing there was more
Yeah.
time. It doesn't mean that I don't wish that there's more time. I'm just really present in that moment as well as wanting more.
Yeah.
And that has really helped take the sting out and to grow our relationship, and so that there isn't so much tension because there's not a lot of time
Yeah.
to be had together. So
Definitely. And that's the thing, and it's going to be different for everyone and every situation, and even as life changes, as the
absolutely.
kids get to different stages and everything. But the most important thing that I've found is just to, I guess, keep asking those questions
Yeah,
and keep working at it, keep asking, keep talking, keep communicating, and realizing that there's going to be times where it's just like, this is not what I thought. And then there's going to be other times where it was like, wow, this is amazing.
totally.
So I'll just wrap up quick because I don't even know how long we've been. I know it's been a while, but anyways, oh, we could always talk for even longer. So,
So
but I
true.
hope I hope that helped. Any ideas? The questions definitely can be used for like anything, and I think we definitely have some other ideas for. There was definitely other questions that were asked that we'll go through at another time, and we will also go through some of those different things. So where I actually got the questions from are actually in this book, The Cortex Circuit by Ed Kang. And and a lot more questions and a lot more thinking and how to and do that. And that's been a huge part of, for us, you and I, as
Absolutely.
with the emotional intelligence and
Yep.
UEQ and all of that. It's been fantastic. And so anyways, we will sign off. And it was a fun talk
Totally was.
again.
Yes.
So